This is Curious Minnesota, a Star Tribune project that sends staff from the state's largest newsroom hunting for the answers to great questions we receive from you, our readers. We're here to answer everything you want to know about the state's people, places, and culture. Welcome to Curious Minnesota. I'm your host, Erica Pearson. This episode of Curious Minnesota is sponsored by Primrose Schools and the Minnesota Historical Society. Today's show is about an astonishing discovery that happened in the 1980s in southwestern Minnesota. A man digging up his pasture found ancient bison bones and stone tools, giving researchers a window into how people lived and hunted 8,000 years ago. It's now called the Pearson site after the couple who own the property. It's one of Minnesota's oldest known bison kill sites and one of a handful of sites in America from this time period, called the early Plains Archaic. Our question came from Dolores Gustafson, who wrote to ask what the site is like today.
I used to live in Granite Falls when I was first married, and I was interested in anything that I see in the paper about Granite Falls. And I happened to run into an article that I had saved from years before about this bison killing place. And I thought, well, I wonder about that. What has happened to it?
Thanks so much to Dolores for this great question. I'm here today with JP Lawrence, my colleague who covers Southwest Minnesota for the Minnesota Star Tribune. JP, thanks for joining me.
Yeah, good morning. Nice to be here. How's it going?
Not too bad. So what kinds of stories do you usually cover for us?
Well, I cover everything from Mankato to Worthington up to Willmar. I live in Redwood Falls, Minnesota. That's where I grew up. And the story we're talking about today, it's actually really cool. It's where my grandma lived growing up, so we would always go there to Granite Falls.
Very cool. And you also worked on a great Curious Minnesota for us about the state's smallest towns with the mayor. And that story prompted Dolores to reach out to you with her question. And I thought it was great that it came to you in the mail, not an email, but in an actual letter. And what intrigued you about the question when you read her letter?
Well, Dolores, she's very old school. She sent in a question about what happened to this bison archaeological dig site in Granite Falls. She said in a follow-up letter, she wrote that she likes to research everywhere she lived. And she said at 96, that's a lot of different places. She said that her son took a liking to archaeology. And it's just something that's always been in the back of her mind. Whatever happened to this archaeological dig site that had a lot of hullabaloo in the early 90s. What happens after this archaeological site when the digging is done? And the fact that she sent it in a letter, too, it just seemed like a great opportunity to really dig in.
So where in Minnesota is this site?
So the site is in Granite Falls. It's about 2 hours west of Minneapolis. It's on the Pearsons' pasture right outside of town, a little bit close to the river. It's in a valley, so when you go out and look at it, you'll see a grassy field, some rocks trying to poke out, a river valley around, a pretty idyllic kind of, a great place to hike.
Interesting. So how was this first discovered?
It was almost completely by accident. I was reading a report that someone wrote, an academic, who was kind of astonished at how, for all the work that people put into scientific endeavors, sometimes it's completely up to chance. And in this case, Leroy Peterson, who worked for the county in Granite Falls, he was digging in his backyard in 1988. He was digging a garbage pit, and then he found bones.
Oh, that's crazy.
Not only bones, but he also found tools, and apparently that is when everything got set off. It was an astonishing find. Over 3 years, archaeologists went out to the site, and eventually they came out with 1,800 lithic artifacts, so cutting tools to prepare bison bones and bison meat, and then 3,800 pieces of bones that are mostly from bison, but there is one canine bone, one tooth from some sort of dog-like animal, and that actually is something that they put a lot of thought into, like what was going on there.
So paint a picture a little bit for us. What happened here? What do they theorize happened here?
So the idea is about 8,000 years ago, ancestors of today's indigenous groups hunted bison in the river valley there. Probably around 12 ancient bison, so bigger than today's bison. There was a hunt. They slaughtered them, and then they took the tools that they had at the time, and they turned the bison into food and to fur. They have this early look into, what people were like in a time that was very different to our own.
Yeah, so long ago. So what was life like during this dig for the Petersons? I know you went out to their home and talked with them. What did they share with you?
For Janet and Leroy Peterson, this was a whirlwind time for them. They had archaeologists coming to visit their site. Janet Peterson was a beautician for 50 years. She said that she'd be doing people's hair, and that's all they would want to talk about. The ancient bison bones that were discovered in her backyard. You had archaeologists, you had students, you had reporters, all coming to this pasture in rural southwest Minnesota. She said that there would be students from the University of Minnesota. She would give them hot cocoa as they dug, and, they would stay over at her parents' house. They would do some digging too. It was a very exciting time for them.
That's really interesting. So let's hear a little from your interview with Janet. We can hear some of it in her own words.
When we found the bones, we got a hold of the University of Minnesota, and they told us about Clyde Peterson, who was part of the Institute of Archaeology, and Clyde was the first one who came over here. After the dig, they sent the bones to St. Cloud State, and their students put them together and figured out how many there were and the ages of them.
Okay, so what is the place like now? I know you described a little bit, but what did you notice when you visited?
They took me out to their field, and the pasture, it looks so serene. It looks almost the same as it used to in the 90s, save for a big sign that says, like, the bison kill site. Janet says that they wanted to put that sign up to let people know. They bring kids over there sometimes on field trips, and that's what they show them.
Got it. And archaeologists didn't end up digging up the whole area, right? Why was that?
That was one of the things that I was most interested in, is what happens when you're digging. When do you stop? Like, when do you figure out when you should, start processing what you want or what you found, or when do you could dig forever, I talked to Jennifer Rankins at the Minnesota Historical Society. She was talking about how, archaeology is a destructive science. You dig, you can't put it back. One of the things that they do, and they developed this over the years after a lot of mistakes, is you dig until you have your questions for the time answered. You want to have portions of the site that are preserved so future generations with better technology, perhaps different questions, so they can come back, dig for themselves, and find out, with the benefit of hindsight and, the advent of technology, new things perhaps.
That's really interesting. I didn't realize that either, so I learned that reading your article. And you also said that researchers are still learning from these bones that they did end up taking out, and that there's some unanswered mysteries. So let's get into that after the break.
At Primrose, our balanced learning approach means exploring academic skills and life skills, combining purposeful play with nurturing guidance from teachers, and setting children up for success in future classrooms. Learn more at primroseschools.com/Twin Cities.
History doesn't only exist in the pages of a book. History exists all around us. You just have to dare to look. Listen to Minnesota Unraveled, a podcast from the Minnesota Historical Society. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
Okay, we're back. So where are the bones and the artifacts now? Are they still being studied?
one of the interesting things about this story was finding out that there was a whole journey that the artifacts and the bones went on after they got dug up. A lot of the artifacts and the bones went to a local museum that was in Granite Falls, which then got flooded in a horrific flood in 1997. The bones, most of them were preserved. Most of everything, they wanted it to find a safer place. So a lot of the bones and artifacts are now at the Minnesota Historical Society. And what I'm told is it's had a legacy where over the years, different generations of researchers will go and do studies or do analysis of these artifacts and bones. It's apparently one of the more popular items that they have there for the researchers to come and take a look.
Mm-hmm. And what kinds of researchers, what kind of scientists?
There's a whole list, not only like archaeologists, but people who study ancient plants. There are people who study the lives of ancient peoples. It's one of those things where so many different people from different fields are interested in looking at these artifacts and bones.
That's so interesting. And the Petersons, because they were found in their property, they still own them, but they've loaned them?
Yeah, they have agreements with the Minnesota Historical Society where they are the stewards and they send them out to the Historical Society to be placed there.
Got it. So I know you mentioned a canine tooth, but what are some of the other unanswered questions from what was found that experts are still wondering about?
I think when I was talking to Jennifer, she was really interested in this canine tooth because there's a lot of questions that could be there. Like, was it a hunting dog that was there at the time? Was it a coyote or some sort of scavenger who went there afterwards? Was it from a completely different era altogether and it just somehow wound up there through like various processes? There's a lot of various questions that could come with that. In addition, if there were people hunting and butchering and processing these animals, one of the things researchers have brought up is perhaps there's a campsite nearby. At other dig sites, they've been able to find fires and campsites. So maybe with the new technology that they have aerial drones, they have new sensors, perhaps they could go back and take a look and see if there's more there. Janet and Leroy Peterson, they still live there, and they're still very open to archaeologists coming back. Janet says that she mows the pasture. She still goes on her riding mower, and she goes back and forth. And she wonders whenever she does that, like, what else is below the ground?
And so is there a chance that researchers and archaeologists could return and restart the dig and see what else is there?
There's a chance. Jennifer at the Historical Society didn't rule it out, but she said that they would have to be strategic. They would have new plans and new researchers.
This is so interesting to me because the thing about this site is that it's like a place of action. You could almost like play the movie in your head about what happened there.
It's really interesting because these bones, they have chop marks. It's not just, bones. It's bones with evidence of human contact. And I think that's one of the interesting things about this site is how much action is implied. Not only that there was a hunt, but, afterwards, humans, much like us, they turned those bison into something that they could use.
Did you get any interesting feedback or comments from folks after this came out?
So there was one email that I got, and they were asking what was the species of bison that was found there. So modern bison, they have a fun scientific name of bison. And the bison that was found there, there's been a lot of research on this. Some people say it was bison occidentalis or bison antiquus. The most recent study on this was in 2016, and that one concluded that it was an extinct bison, bison occidentalis. But what was funny is in this research, the researcher kind of got a little snarky about it. He was saying that there's a lot of debate about this, but these were big, shaggy beasts that provided meat, grease, hide, bones, and a wealth of other resources, regardless of their taxonomic classification.
Oh, that's great. Well, I think that's a good note to go out on. So thank you so much, JP.
Yeah, and thanks so much for having me. And it was a really interesting journey that letter from Dolores sent me on.
I love it. Okay, so that's it for today's show. You can read all of our Curious Minnesota stories online at startribune.com/curious. And thanks, as always, to Matt Gilmer for editing this podcast. If you have feedback for us or a question you'd like us to answer, you can send a note to curious@startribune.com.
Thanks for listening to Curious Minnesota. We want to hear from you. Ask questions and read more stories online at startribune.com/curious. Our show is recorded at the Star Tribune's headquarters in beautiful downtown Minneapolis, and our music is produced by Matt Gilmer. If you like the show, please rate us on iTunes or leave a review. And until next time, stay curious.